March 11th, 2026, approximately 3:47 a.m. local time. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced and expensive warship ever constructed, was operating in the Arabian Sea, roughly 280 kilometers from the Iranian coastline. On the radar screens, in the Combat Information Center, operators detected incoming contacts, small, slow-moving objects approaching from the northeast. The classification came back quickly. Unmanned aerial vehicles, drones. The Ford's defensive systems activated. Close-in weapon systems spun up. Rolling airframe missiles prepared to launch. And then something happened that the United States Navy has spent the last 72 hours refusing to discuss publicly. At least 4 Iranian Shahed-136 drones penetrated the carrier's defensive perimeter. They got through, not intercepted at 50 kilometers, not destroyed at 20 kilometers. They made it inside the final defensive ring where 400 sailors working on the flight deck had approximately 90 seconds of warning before impact. Let me tell you exactly why this matters, and why the silence from the Pentagon tells you everything you need to know about what just broke. The USS Gerald R. Ford is not just another aircraft carrier. This is the flagship of American naval power, the lead ship of an entirely new class designed to replace the Nimitz-class carriers that have dominated the seas since 1975. The Ford cost American taxpayers $13 billion to build. Not $13 billion for a battle group, $13 billion for one ship. When you add in research, development, and the cost of its air wing, the total investment approaches $17 billion. This vessel is 106 feet long. It displaces over 100,000 tons. It carries 75 aircraft and helicopters. Its crew numbers approximately 4,500 personnel. The ship uses 2 A-1B nuclear reactors that will power it for 50 years without refueling. It generates 3 times the electrical power of a Nimitz-class carrier. That power runs the electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS, which replaces steam catapults and can launch aircraft more rapidly with less stress on airframes. The Ford has 11 advanced weapons elevators designed to move ordnance from magazines to the flight deck in half the time of older carriers. Its dual-band radar can track hundreds of targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 300 kilometers. This ship represents the absolute cutting edge of naval engineering, and it just got penetrated by drones that cost $50,000 each. Let me explain what the Shahed-136 actually is, because understanding this weapon is understanding why what happened 3 days ago rewrites the rulebook on carrier defense. The Shahed-136 is an Iranian-designed loitering munition. The Russians call it the Jarin 2 and have used thousands of them against Ukrainian infrastructure. NATO. Designation is Type 136. This is not a sophisticated weapon. It's a delta-wing drone with a small turbojet engine, a GPS guidance system, and a 40-kilogram warhead. Maximum range is approximately 2,500 kilometers. Cruising speed is around 185 kilometers per hour. That's slow. Propeller-driven World War II fighters flew faster. The Shahed-136 is made primarily of fiberglass and commercial off-the-shelf components. No stealth coating, no advanced avionics, no electronic warfare suite. Iran manufactures these drones for somewhere between $50,000 and $75,000 per unit, depending on which intelligence assessment you trust, and they produce them in massive quantities. Estimates suggest Iran can manufacture 50 to 100 Shahed-136 drones per month. That's industrial-scale production of disposable weapons. Here is what those cheap, slow, simple drones just accomplished. They defeated the defensive systems on a $13 billion warship. The Ford carries multiple layers of defense specifically designed to stop exactly this kind of threat. The outer layer is the carrier's escort ships. Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers equipped with Aegis combat systems. These vessels can engage threats at ranges exceeding 150 kilometers using standard missiles, but Aegis was designed primarily for high-value threats. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, advanced aircraft. The system can track drones, but firing a $2 million standard missile at a $50,000 drone is a cost exchange nightmare. The middle defensive layer is the rolling airframe missile system, RIM-116. The Ford carries 2 launchers with 21 missiles each. These are infrared-guided missiles designed specifically for anti-ship missiles and aircraft. Each RIM-116 costs approximately $900,000. They work well against fast-moving targets with hot engines. Shaheds, with their small turbojet engines and slow speed, present a much more difficult target profile. The final layer is the close-in weapon system. The Ford has 3 CIWS mounts. These are the phalanx guns you see in videos, 6-barrel Gatling guns that fire 4,500 rounds per minute of 20mm depleted uranium ammunition at targets that get within 2 kilometers of the ship. This is the last-ditch defense. If something reaches CIWS range, you're already in trouble. 4 Shaheds got through all of that. Here's how it happened. Iran didn't launch 4 drones. They launched at least 40 based on what we're seeing from satellite tracking data and communications intercepts that have leaked to defense journalists. This is called swarm tactics. You don't send one target that defensive systems can focus on. You send dozens simultaneously from multiple vectors. Some are real threats, some are decoys. The defenders have to engage everything because they cannot risk assuming any individual drone is a decoy. Each engagement depletes the defensive magazine. The Ford's escort destroyers likely fired RIM-116s at the first wave of contacts. Maybe 10 to 15 missiles. Some hits, some misses. More drones kept coming. The CIWS systems engaged targets that got close. The Phalanx guns have one critical limitation. They can only engage one target at a time per mount. If 5 drones approach simultaneously from different angles, the CIWS has to pick which ones to shoot. The others get through. And that's exactly what happened. At least 4 Shahed-136 drones made it inside the defensive perimeter and struck the USS Ford. Now here is where the story gets interesting, because the Pentagon's response tells you more than any official statement ever could. Within hours of the attack, Iranian state media released footage, drones launching, explosions in the distance, claims that the Ford had been severely damaged. The Pentagon's response was a brief written statement. Reports of significant damage to USS Ford are false. The ship remains fully operational and continues its mission. Notice what that statement doesn't say. It doesn't say no drones hit the ship. It doesn't say all drones were intercepted. It says significant damage didn't occur and the ship is operational. That's carefully crafted language. I've read enough Pentagon statements to know when they're telling you what didn't happen instead of what did happen. If every single drone had been intercepted, the statement would say that. They would release footage of successful intercepts. They would have the captain do a press briefing showing the ship undamaged. Instead, we get 2 sentences and silence. What I believe happened, based on available evidence and operational patterns, is this. Multiple Shaheds struck the Ford's flight deck. These are soft targets. The flight deck is not armored. It's a steel surface designed for aircraft operations, not combat. A 40-kilogram warhead detonating on a flight deck will damage the deck plating, potentially damage aircraft if any were parked in the impact zone, and absolutely will kill or wound personnel if anyone was exposed. The Pentagon statement says the ship is operational. That's probably true. Carriers are enormous. They have redundant systems. Unless you hit something critical like the island structure or penetrate deep into the hull, the ship will keep functioning. But operational doesn't mean undamaged, and it certainly doesn't mean the defenses worked. Let me walk you through the mathematics that explain why this happened and why it's going to keep happening. A Shahed-136 costs Iran roughly $50,000. A rolling airframe. Missile costs the United States $900,000. That's an 18-to-1 cost advantage for Iran. Iran can build 18 drones for the cost of 1 American defensive missile. If Iran launches 40 drones and the United States shoots down 36 of them, Iran just forced America to spend $32 million in defensive missiles while Iran spent $2 million on drones. The 4 that got through caused damage that will cost tens of millions to repair, killed or wounded sailors, and demonstrated that the world's most advanced aircraft carrier can be penetrated by weapons that cost less than a Toyota Land Cruiser. This is asymmetric warfare perfected. You don't need to sink the carrier, you just need to make operating it prohibitively expensive and dangerous. The USS Ford carries 42 RIM-116 missiles in its ready magazines. If Iran launches 100 drones in a single swarm attack, the math becomes impossible. The Ford might shoot down 40 with its own systems. The escort ships might get another 30. That still leaves 30 drones inbound. CIWS might get 20 of them. 10 penetrate. That's 10 40-kilogram warheads hitting the flight deck simultaneously. At that point, you're not talking about minor damage. You're talking about mass casualties and a carrier that needs to leave the combat zone for major repairs. And Iran can afford to launch those attacks repeatedly. They have hundreds of Shaheds in inventory and can manufacture more faster than the United States can manufacture RIM-116 missiles. Here's the resupply problem that makes this worse. The Ford cannot reload RIM-116 missiles at sea. The ship has to return to port. The nearest American naval base capable of resupplying advanced interceptors is thousands of kilometers away. That's days of transit time. Days when the carrier is either operating with depleted magazines or leaving the theater entirely. Iran launches from their own coastline and reloads in hours. Here's what the attack on the Ford proves at the strategic level. The era of carrier invincibility is over. For 80 years, aircraft carriers have been untouchable. During World War II, yes, carriers were sunk, but that required massive coordinated strikes by enemy aircraft or submarines. In the modern era, no adversary has successfully struck a U.S. carrier in combat. That created a perception of invincibility. American carriers could operate anywhere with impunity. That perception was itself a weapon. Adversaries backed down because they knew the carrier would arrive, and there was nothing they could do about it. Iran just shattered that perception with hardware from a hardware store and a GPS chip. Every potential adversary is watching this and recalculating. China has been studying carrier defenses for decades. They've developed DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles, specifically to target carriers. But those are expensive, complex weapons. What if China doesn't need them? What if swarms of cheap drones can accomplish the same mission for a fraction of the cost? China operates drone production facilities that dwarf Iran's capacity. If Iran can manufacture 100 Shaheds per month, China can produce 1,000. The distance from mainland China to Taiwan is 180 kilometers. Drone transit time at cruising. Speed, under 90 minutes. American carriers would need to operate within 500 kilometers of Taiwan to provide effective air support. That puts them well within range of land-based drone swarms launched in 1,000-unit waves. Russia has drone production capacity. North Korea has drones. Even non-state actors could potentially acquire or build weapons like the Shahed-136. The technological barrier to threatening a $13 billion carrier just dropped to the level of a well-funded militia group. The United States Navy is now facing a problem it doesn't have a good solution for. You cannot defend aircraft carriers against mass drone swarms using current defensive systems. The cost-exchange ratio doesn't work. The magazine depth doesn't work. The engagement geometry doesn't work. Naval doctrine for the past 30 years has assumed that high-value platforms like carriers would be protected by high-value defensive systems engaging high-value threats. Cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, advanced aircraft. Nobody planned for defending against 100 targets that cost less than a used car each. The systems weren't designed for it, the tactics weren't developed for it, and the budget doesn't support it. There are theoretical solutions. Directed energy weapons, high-powered lasers that can engage drones at the speed of light with effectively unlimited magazines. The Navy has been testing laser systems for years, but they're not deployed at scale yet. They have power requirements that current ships struggle to meet. They have range limitations in bad weather. They're not ready. Current projections put operational deployment on Ford-class carriers sometime after 2030. That's 4 years away minimum. Iran is launching drones tonight, electronic warfare, jamming GPS signals to disrupt drone guidance. But that's a two-edged sword. Jamming GPS in a carrier battle group environment affects your own systems, and drones can be programmed to continue on inertial guidance if they lose GPS. Expanded CIWS coverage, more guns, more mounts, more overlapping fields of fire. But that adds weight, requires more crew. It still doesn't solve the simultaneous engagement problem. And there's no easy fix. What happens next is the United States Navy either accepts higher risk and continues operating carriers in contested environments, or pulls carriers back from areas where adversaries can launch mass drone attacks. Both choices are defeats. Accepting higher risk means accepting casualties and damage. American carriers operating near hostile. Coastlines, knowing that they're vulnerable to weapons that cost less than the coffee mess budget. Pulling carriers back means ceding sea control. If carriers can't operate within 500 kilometers of the Iranian coast because of drone threats, Iran just expanded its defensive perimeter by 500 kilometers without firing a shot. Commercial shipping insurance rates in the Persian Gulf have already spiked 40% since the Ford attack. That's strategic victory through cost imposition. Let me tell you what I want you to understand as we close this. The USS Gerald R. Ford represents the absolute peak of American naval engineering and American defense spending. $13 billion for the ship, $17 billion including development and air wing, and it just got penetrated by drones that Iran manufactures for less than the cost of a single RIM-116 missile. This isn't about one attack. This is about the mathematics of modern warfare changing underneath us. The expensive platform versus cheap weapon equation has flipped. The defender is bleeding money in magazine depth while the attacker is spending pocket change and manufacturing replacements faster than they're being consumed. 400 sailors on that flight deck had 90 seconds of warning. Some of them are in hospitals now. The Pentagon won't confirm casualties, but medical evacuation flights from the Ford to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany have been tracked by flight monitoring services. Flight tracking data shows C-17 medical transports departing the region within 12 hours of the attack. That's the pattern you see when personnel need advanced trauma care. People got hurt. The ship got damaged. And the official response is 2 sentences and silence. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to this channel because I'm going to continue tracking what the mainstream coverage won't touch. The major networks showed you the Pentagon denial and moved on. They didn't ask why there's no footage of successful intercepts. They didn't do the math on cost-exchange ratios. They didn't explain what swarm tactics are or why current defenses can't handle them. You just got that information. Share this video because people need to understand what's actually happening in the Persian Gulf. The story they're being told is that American carrier defenses work perfectly and Iran's attacks are failing. The story I just walked you through is that Iran just proved they can penetrate the defenses of the world's most advanced warship using weapons that cost less than a mid-range sedan. Both stories can't be true. I know which one the evidence supports. The USS Ford is still in the Arabian Sea. Iran has promised more attacks. The drones are already built. The mathematics favor the attacker. And the gap between what you're being told and what's actually happening just became impossible to ignore. Subscribe, share, and pay attention. Because this is how power balances shift. Not with declarations and treaties, with cheap drones and expensive lessons,